Welcome, Bankless Nation, to this edition of Meet the Nation. Today, I'm talking to Yago from the Sovryn project. Sovryn is building out a DeFi ecosystem natively on Bitcoin. And if you have ever been frustrated, which we do get feedback from some members of the Bankless Nation about how Ethereum and Ether focused that Ryan and I are, this is an episode to give you a different flavor of that, right? This is much more of a Bitcoin focused episode. Yago was a fantastic guest that I think represents Bitcoin values and crypto economic just progress and innovation. While we are both while I'm taking off my Ethereum hat and putting on my Bitcoin hat, which I can do, surprise, surprise, to really talk about Sovryn and DeFi native Bitcoin. Or Bitcoin native DeFi, excuse me. I'm in complete agreement with Yago that like WBTC, RenBTC, TBTC on Ethereum, it's kind of, and from the Bitcoin perspective, not actually DeFi, because you have to have these trust assumptions for getting Bitcoin onto Ethereum. And so if Bitcoin wants its own trustless level of decentralized finance, it needs to be built on Bitcoin. And so while sometimes I criticize Bitcoin for being just this inert substance that is really unproductive, Sovryn really fixes this. Sovryn allows for Bitcoin or in BTC, the asset, to really have expressivity and optionality as an asset, and really throws a wrench in the arguments of a lot of Ethereum arguments about Ether, the asset, trying to be maximally expressive and programmable. Sovryn allows all of these things that we talk about Ether for with Ethereum. It allows it for Bitcoin. So the TLDR of Sovryn, it's a side chain of Bitcoin. It's an EVM-compatible system, and so they can take a lot of Ethereum code and deploy it on Sovryn. And all of a sudden, we have AMMs on Bitcoin, money markets on Bitcoin, like a Make Your DAO fork on Bitcoin. Yago does a fantastic job explaining all of these little nuances and how this whole system works and where consensus comes from. I really thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. So let's go ahead and get into it with Yago from Sovryn. But first, a moment to talk about some of these fantastic sponsors that make this show possible. Bankless is proud to be supported by UNISWAP. UNISWAP is a new paradigm in asset exchange infrastructure. Instead of a cumbersome order book system where trades are matched with other humans, UNISWAP is an autonomous piece of software on Ethereum, which is what Ryan and I call a money robot. No human counterparties or centralized intermediaries, just autonomous code on Ethereum. Input the token you want to sell and receive the token you want to buy. Something brand new in the Uniswap ecosystem is the Uniswap Grants program is now accepting applications for grants. We have been saying this for a while and we'll say it again. DAOs have money and they are in need of labor. If you think that you have something to contribute to the Uniswap DAO, apply for a grant to Uniswap. Just look at the size of the Uniswap treasury. It's almost $3 billion. This mountain of capital is looking for labor. Do you have something of value to contribute to the Uniswap DAO? No matter how big or small your idea is, you can apply for a uni grant at unigrants.org and help steer Uniswap in the direction that you think it should go. That's exactly what we did to get Uniswap to be a sponsor for Bankless, and you can do the same for your project. Thank you, Uniswap, for sponsoring Bankless. AAVE is a borrowing and lending protocol on Ethereum, and just recently released AAVE version 2, which has a ton of cool new features that makes using AAVE even more powerful. With AAVE, you can leverage the full power of DeFi money Legos, yield, and composability all in one application. On AAVE, there are a ton of assets that you can deposit in order to gain yield, and all of those same assets can also be borrowed from the protocol if you have deposited collateral. Here you can see me getting a 200 USDC loan against my portfolio of a number of different DeFi tokens and ETH. I'll choose a variable interest rate because it's a lower rate than the stable interest rate option, but I could choose the stable interest rate option if I wanted to lock that interest rate in permanently. One of AAVE's V2 features is the ability to swap collateral without having to withdraw your assets, trade them on Uniswap, and then deposit them back into AAVE. AAVE does all of this for you all in one seamless transaction, so you don't have to repay loans in order to change the collateral you have backing them. Check out the power of AAVE at aave.com. That's AAVE.com. All right, Bankless Nation, I am here with Yago from Sovryn, and Sovryn is an interesting project that is in a design space that we don't typically cover here on the Bankless program. Sovryn is building DeFi on Bitcoin, and so I have all my own questions about what DeFi on Bitcoin looks like, and we are going to ask and hopefully answer some of those questions today. Yago, welcome to the Bankless Nation. Happy to have you.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yago, so tell us a little bit about Sovryn before we get into what it is. Tell us about the background and the motivation and the impetus for creating Sovryn, and also a little bit about the formulation of the team. Who are you, and why are you interested in building Sovryn, and who did you collect around you to help build out DeFi on Bitcoin?
Sure. So a little bit about me. My background's in neuroscience. I started a few biotech companies in the neuroscience machine learning space. Because I was doing that, I was reading papers in network science around 2010-11. In 2011, I came across a paper by this dude called Satoshi, and it blew my mind and screwed up my life because very, very shortly afterwards, I dropped everything else I was doing, and I've been focused on Bitcoin and crypto ever since. And what drew me to it is there's this American line, money makes the world go round. And it's extremely true, right? The degree to which you are free, the degree to which you are able to determine your life, express your true values, and to the degree to which you are sovereign is entirely dependent on how much in control you are of your value, right? Of the value you produce, of the value you own, of the value you save, of your financial and monetary life. And my personal background, I've encountered this in many, many different ways. So I come from a family of Holocaust survivors. Part of them ended up, and where I ended up was in apartheid South Africa. My family were extremely politically active. They were members of the ANC. Some of them were regarded as terrorists by the apartheid government, and had to flee South Africa. I ended up smuggling gold out of South Africa as a very young child. And so that, and a whole assortment of other ways in which my family have been on the wrong side of history throughout the 20th century, really inculcated in me an understanding that the most valuable type of free speech is the speech that you make with money, right? I mean, that's like, there's another great American phrase, put your money where your mouth is, right? We're never more honest or more true about what we value in the world, and the way we express that value than the way we interact with our financial lives. So when I came across Bitcoin, it immediately struck me as an extremely important innovation, probably the most important innovation I would ever see. And then on the level of curiosity, right? So my intellectual curiosity had always been about network systems, and the internet had always struck me as missing something, which is a native economy, right? Everything was ads, and the reason everything was ads is there's nothing else you can do on the internet, or there wasn't. And then suddenly there was this digital form of scarcity that was presented, which I realized was basically the second pillar that was required in order to allow us to have fundamentally digitally driven lives. So ever since I've been involved in the space, primarily in trying to be involved in projects around getting these technologies into the hands of as many people as possible, of trying to make Bitcoin and crypto hyper inclusive, out of the sense that the problem with these tools is that by the time you realize you need them, it's usually too late.
Right.
So I set up, among other things, a company which we were managing remittances to Nigeria, to Zimbabwe, to China, to Brazil, and set up payment processing for exchanges that had lost their banking, and was very engaged sort of on that side of the space. And over the course of the years, I'd watched how Bitcoin and the rest of the crypto environment had evolved. And there was one thing, like in the same way that the internet had been missing something, right? Which was digital scarcity. Crypto, Bitcoin, was missing something fundamental, right? You had this amazing decentralized, censorship resistant asset. And the minute you wanted to do anything with it, you had to go to a centralized exchange and re-intermediate yourself. It made absolutely no sense. And so this idea of decentralized exchanges was deeply bound with the idea of Bitcoin from the very, very earliest days. And, there were things like colored coins or the Omni network. And there were multiple different attempts to create this. And it really started to emerge about 2 years ago. And I think for me, the big realization was MakerDAO, right? What MakerDAO managed to accomplish, which is effectively competing with the Fed in with a decentralized mechanism, really got me excited. And so about a year ago, we were, I and a number of other Bitcoiners who I'd known sort of from the early days, were raising money for COVID-related things, primarily distribution of masks to where they were needed in a decentralized fashion. And we found ourselves talking about what was still missing, what we were happy about, what we were disappointed in. And the thing that kept on coming back was that Bitcoin still didn't have a native way of having decentralized finance or using this asset without intermediation. And then a couple of the devs started coding something up and showed it to us. And that was the beginning of Sovryn. And so what Sovryn is I think a fundamentally simple idea, which is that we have this core asset, very likely to become the reserve asset of the future. Although I know that you in particular have some thoughts on this. And it needs to extend its capabilities into the financial layer, or all of this nonsense about hyper Bitcoinization and building freedom and recreating it's all going to end up with just a bunch of Bitcoin held in Coinbase and by Fidelity.
Right. There's a line that I like to use where really there are only two categories of intermediation, and one is the money that we use, and the other is the technology that we use. And really what makes me optimistic about the world of crypto economics is it really fundamentally changes both money and technology. And when you disintermediate or just reinvent how intermediation happens, both with technology and money, you change everything. It changes all culture everywhere, right? And so like the reason why you go into your own history and talk about like getting gold out of South Africa, or just like your family being on the wrong side of history, to me it's very much a political and cultural conversation as to like what happens when you don't have sovereignty over your money. Like the culture is different, and like why you and I and the shared values and ethos of people who put decentralization first is because like we very much value the cultural impacts of where decentralization comes from. And so I want to get into the details of Sovryn and how it works on a technical level. But first I want to talk about like because the obvious, I think, question that many like call them ETH maxis or ETH heads or whatever will ask is like, well, then why not just build DeFi on Bitcoin or DeFi on Ethereum, right? Like we already have DeFi on Ethereum, just come over to Ethereum. But really all of the implementations of Bitcoin on Ethereum are not awesome. They're not great. Talk about why there's motivation to just build DeFi natively on Bitcoin, and why Bitcoin on Ethereum perhaps is not exactly what you are looking for as a future of sovereign finance.
Sure. Well, I think there are two reasons, and I'll call them the little reason and the big reason, and I'll start with the little reason.
Okay.
The little reason is that there is basically no DeFi for Bitcoin, even if it's on Ethereum. To a first approximation, all of the Bitcoin, so to speak, on Ethereum is coming through WBTC and RenBTC, which are both effectively centralized systems. So you may be using a DeFi protocol, but you're not using DeFi. Your assets are centralized. And so the little reason is, at least at this point, there is no DeFi for Bitcoin.
Right.
There's an additional thing, which is that and it's another little reason, from a convenience perspective, if you have Bitcoin, and this is the asset that you want to transact in, to now go and acquire Ethereum as a secondary asset and you're gated by it and you need to pay the fees in that, not to mention, sort of like the micro situation right now of how expensive those fees are, blah, 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 blah. it's not appropriate. Now, so on the micro level right now, despite the fact that Ethereum has this culture of hyper inclusivity, it's, from a practical perspective, actually probably the most exclusive blockchain in the world right now. And one of the ideas that has really percolated through Sovryn is the idea that you shouldn't have to be early and you shouldn't have to be technical in order to be free.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one reason, but that's the little reason, because these things are part of the sort of micro or macro structure of the current system, and Ethereum can change and evolve over time. The big reason is this. The big reason is that, to my mind, whether you realize it or not, every single person who is in crypto is a Bitcoiner. And that's because if Bitcoin fails, the entire enterprise fails. Now, we see this on the day-to-day level, where Bitcoin goes up, everything goes up. Bitcoin goes down, everything goes down. And Bitcoin is the center of gravity for this entire space. But there's a deeper level of understanding which I think is required here, and I think this is, you know, where you and I probably are going to most disagree, which is that I think we only get one shot at creating a digital reserve currency. And if we win with that one shot, then there can be other digital reserve currencies, right? So if you think about the dollar, right, through the 1800s, there was a system called bimetallism. The dollar was backed by both gold and silver. But we need to get the gold first,
right?
Because otherwise, let's imagine a situation right now where, you know, you've got a lot of Ethereum, you want Ethereum to do very well. A lot of people end up thinking like you. There is this thing, the flippening, right? And suddenly Ethereum is trading at a higher value than Bitcoin. What I think happens on that day, from a narrative perspective, is that both of them start trading like tech stocks, and neither of them is able to ever acquire monetary premium. And so I think the ability of the entire space to acquire monetary premium is solely dependent on whether or not Bitcoin gets there. And so it's extremely important that we build an ecosystem which is able to support that effort, not just for Bitcoin, but for the entire ecosystem.
Right. Yeah, that's a very nuanced argument that I actually haven't really heard before. And you know, while listeners are probably pretty familiar with my particular like bias or stance towards with a positive stance towards Ethereum versus Bitcoin, I'm actually kind of grateful to have this opportunity to actually talk with a Bitcoin first Bitcoiner. Because like I do agree that there is this potential for Bitcoin to do more than typically what I illustrate on like the weekly rollups when I really just have my Ethereum hat on. And largely it's really because there isn't DeFi on Bitcoin yet, right? And that's why that's why I'm primarily interested in talking to Sovryn, right? Because in my most critical days, I'll call like Bitcoin like pet rock or digital gold, right? And it just like it's a very inert substance. It's like this Excel sheet where on one column you have holders and on the second column you have balances, and that's all it does. And for all the same reasons that you articulated, like if we just put, you know, Bitcoin into Coinbase for our borrowing and lending and trading and you know, collateralization opportunities, then we don't have sovereignty, right? And there's, I'm sure there's a very fantastic reason why you're calling this project Sovryn, right? And so really the biggest argument for all the people that, and there are like Bankless listeners who perhaps get like frustrated with me and Ryan and our level of like etherism. And so perhaps this is a time to really like take that hot hat off, because like the really compelling argument for Bitcoin is exactly as you articulated, right? Like, well, as soon as you can actually get native DeFi to Bitcoin with no additional trust assumptions, then all of a sudden we can talk about like Bitcoin as like a highly functional reserve asset of the world, right? And like there is something that Ether will never ever be able to emulate with regards to Bitcoin. Number one being first, and number two being that this immaculate conception, which, you know, some people will disagree to the level of how powerful that actually is. But at the end of the day, like a lot of people respect it, and a lot of people have that like, well, it's inarguable to some degree, like how powerful that is because of how much other people really respect that feature about Bitcoin. And so like the biggest argument against what me and Ryan often articulate is something like Sovryn, something like DeFi, native to Bitcoin that's on the base Bitcoin blockchain. And that really turns Bitcoin into this more inert substance into something more expressive with more optionality that allows users to really have the full, not just monetary disintermediation, which is where I see Bitcoin. Bitcoin gets 10 out of 10 scores on monetary disintermediation, but it's lacking on the technological disintermediation because we have to use centralized custodians. If we can actually build out that technological disintermediation with Sovryn, then all of a sudden, a lot of the arguments that Ryan and I really put forth about like why Ether is a compelling reserve asset, it's all of a sudden very competitive. So let's actually get into the technical details of Sovryn. So say I've got Bitcoin on Bitcoin. What's the user story for getting my Bitcoin onto Sovryn? Tell us about that process.
Right. So I'm going to start with the. So this is an evolving thing.
Mm-hmm.
The way it works now, there's a peg.
Mm-hmm.
This peg is what we call a POW peg. So it's a proof of work proven peg via a federation of HSM holders, where proof needs to be provided from both a Bitcoin sidechain, which is merge mined with Bitcoin, and the Bitcoin network via SPV proofs. So you have this basically cryptographically trust reduced, trust minimized federated peg, which allows you to lock up your Bitcoin on main chain, move it to a side chain on Bitcoin, which is called rootstock, and then you're still using Bitcoin. It's still protected, and every single transaction is mined by the Bitcoin miners. But now your Bitcoin has basically superpowers. It has a greater degree of expressivity.
Can I pause you there? Because I want to get some technical definitions set. When we typically talk about side chains on the Bankless program, we're talking when we use them, we're talking about a system that has a different consensus mechanism to what when we're typically talking about it, we're talking about Ethereum, right? So we have Ethereum L2s, and those are things like rollups that have one-to-one security parameters as the actual Ethereum blockchain, right? The Ethereum blockchain is the where final settlement occurs, and no other final settlement occurs by any other mechanism. So we call those L2s. Sidechains are something in the way that we use it is a system where there's a different consensus. There's a different consensus mechanism. The Polygon network is a sidechain, and it has consensus by a different token, Matic token, and it's a proof of stake token. And it actually has a different level of settlement because it settles using Matic. So when you call the rootstock, or when you call the rootstock sidechain, is that right?
That's right.
Is Bitcoin the final settlement, or is rootstock the final settlement?
So in Bitcoin land, it's a little bit different.
Okay.
It is a separate consensus mechanism, which allows for a separate sense of rules. But the consensus is Bitcoin proof of work and mined by Bitcoin miners in a process known as blind merge mining. So effectively what's happening is the Bitcoin miners, as they're looking for the next Bitcoin block, are producing waste hashes, right? These waste hashes, the right waste hash will actually discover a block for rootstock. And so you merge the security of the two chains, but are able to have different rule sets. And so what that also means is that there's no new token. It's all one token and one token ecosystem. Now, the power of this is, and the whole reason this exists, is because rootstock is effectively EVM compatible, right? So we can write Solidity code on rootstock. And there's been obviously this huge amount of innovation in the Ethereum space, which can now be adapted to the security assurances of Bitcoin, with Bitcoin as the native asset. And so the way that you get on it, you can go directly through the peg, which is a little bit of an arduous process, or you can use a relay that has been constructed, which is known as the fast BTC relay, which means that within one block, you basically do a Bitcoin transaction, and one block later, you are on the sidechain. Now, So that's the current state, and I'll just point out where we expect this to go. So I think what's happening with Ethereum, and one of the things that Ethereum has proven is that building everything on layer one just doesn't work. Doesn't matter if it's a sidechain or not.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the most phenomenal technology that has been built on Ethereum, which we're most excited about, is everything to do with rollups, and in particular zero knowledge rollups.
Mm-hmm.
So we have effectively a very vague right now roadmap, but it's got a 3-step process. Step one is we have this merge mined Bitcoin sidechain with similar assurances to Bitcoin. Very, very soon we'll be in phase 2, and by very, very soon, I think we're talking 40 days or less. We will be on a roll up, which rolls up to that, which effectively takes the computation off of that chain, but provides the same assurances again. So you have the scalability of a rollup. And then where we expect this can go in a slightly longer period, where we're talking maybe 2-3 years, is that you can effectively do away with the sidechain entirely and roll up to DLC enabled Lightning Network. So effectively, Lightning Network integrated with extremely primitive smart contracts that all they know how to do is read these zero knowledge proofs. And then what you ultimately end up with is everything collapses down to Bitcoin main chain seamlessly without even having a separate consensus mechanism at all.
So in that version of the world, Sovryn and just DeFi on Bitcoin, the consensus is the Lightning Network, which the consensus is Bitcoin. And right. So like the cool thing about rollups is like rollups is actually a blockchain neutral piece of technology. You can actually apply it on any piece of blockchain, no matter the construction. I think that's right. And so what your long-term vision is so. Does that mean that rootstock is built on Lightning in this future version of the world, or this is just Sovryn being not Lightning enabled?
So again, even within Sovryn, don't think everyone agrees with me on this. I've been a sidechain advocate for about as long as you could have been a sidechain advocate, right? 2014 when the idea really started, and it's always frustrated me that I think, we are all familiar with what happened with the Bitcoin. Well, not all of us, but probably the people listening to us right now know a lot of the story of how Bitcoin, had this massive civil war, and then things kind of ossified for a while. And this actually, I think the majority of Bitcoiners has been pretty frustrating, and I think is why people are getting so excited about Sovryn. But the overall thinking was, look, if you have sidechains, you basically can do anything. You can extend any functionality onto Bitcoin. You can have infinite scalability. And what I think I'm starting to realize is that you might not even need the sidechains at all, right? So if you have smart state channels, and rollups, which has been this huge contribution that Ethereum has brought to the world, then you basically can roll up directly into the state channel.
Right. And naturally everything gets more efficient that way, and also with reduced trust assumptions. So that's what we like. And in a bankless universe, that's what we need the most. That's really exciting. And so we have this all of a sudden, this EVM-compatible layer 2 Bitcoin, which again collapses down to the Bitcoin network. One of the really powerful things about DeFi on Ethereum is that it's got this permissionless level of innovation, right? And so if you want to build something, you don't ask for permission, you just build it. And all of a sudden you have that composability with the rest of all DeFi apps on Ethereum. Is that the way that it also would in theory work with Sovryn, right? Is there permissionless access to building on Sovryn, just as there is permissionless access?
I mean, it's not even theoretical. It's exactly how it works. So I mean, anyone can deploy anything to rootstock and integrate with Sovryn. A number of projects are already starting to do it. So we have some pretty exciting projects. We've got a project called Money on Chain, which has developed a Bitcoin-backed stablecoin. There are a number of other interesting Bitcoin-backed stablecoin constructions coming along. There's an aggregator protocol called Babelfish, which one of the things that's happening right now, just across the entire crypto space, is we have like an asset like USDT or ETH, and it's being represented on all of these different chains and all of these different layers. And so you get like right now there's like 12 different versions of USDT on Binance Smart Chain, for example. I don't even know how many there are on Ethereum, right? So Babelfish re-aggregates them and provides you with like a single token that can move across chains. Exactly. So there's a whole bunch of sort of work that's being done around sort of like the core Sovryn protocol, and anyone, for a developer coming from the Ethereum space, it's basically the same experience.
Right. And so the conversation of like, all right, well, what does DeFi on Bitcoin look like actually kind of stops right there, because like listeners know what DeFi on Ethereum looks like. And if you're just an EVM compatible layer to Bitcoin, like, well, it in theory, it could just become exactly the same. And there's always been this line that Bitcoiners have chanted into, like, since the beginning of time, is like, if it's useful, it'll be built on Bitcoin eventually. And so we have all of this software. We have like Uniswap, we have Maker, we have Compound, all this, and everything is open source and free to fork. I mean, Uniswap v3 has that license, but like whatever. And so in theory, you can just copy it and put it right onto Sovryn, and all of a sudden you have you'll have the equivalent level of DeFi on Bitcoin. That's right?
Yeah. So if you look at what Sovryn right now has, Sovryn currently has swaps in the form of an AMM. It has an Oracle system quite similar to the Uniswap Oracle system, allowing it to not require external oracles. It's got borrowing, lending, Bitcoin-backed stable coins, margin trading, a sort of token launch platform that's been built out. It's got auction systems. It's the richness and power of the protocol, given the amount of time that it's taken to build, is very, very impressive. And the overall goal of the project is effectively to provide a extension to Bitcoin, which is a financial operating system, or the financial operating system of the future.
Very cool. Very cool. So you said you have an AMM, you have a credit facility. So is this all of these applications that are being built on Sovryn, are these done by the Sovryn team, or are there other just like independent builders who are also building on Sovryn at this moment? Yeah,
so Sovryn looks a little bit different from most other projects. There's no company behind Sovryn, and it started out. So the first devs who were working on the protocol were pseudonymous devs, kind of like in the tradition of Satoshi, or in the tradition of rug pulls, and so so that's where the work started. And then what has happened since so one of the first things that was built out actually was a governance system, which we haven't even spoken about, but it also looks a little bit different from most of the projects on that I've seen on Ethereum, in that the way it works is you have an SOV token. The SOV token has a number of uses in the system. One is it acts as a collateral for the trustless peg. But the other thing is it's used for voting in the system and earning the revenues that the protocol generates. But it's a quadratically weighted system, where the longer you lock yourself up for, the more voting power you have, and the more value of the protocol you accrue. And the idea basically was to focus governance participants into thinking for the long term, and also make sure that the system was resistant to any sort of flash governance attacks. What has happened as a result has been remarkable. There's roughly about 12,500 SOV token holders, of whom about 4,500 are staking. The median time that they're staking for, and when you stake, it's extreme. It's like Bitcoin level severe. You know how Bitcoiners are very, very stern. They're like the Puritans of the blockchain world. So when you lock yourself up, that's it. Like, you lose liquidity for that period of time. The median stake time is 2 years, and the average vote, of which there have now been 16, has a 60% participation level. So it's the sort of the focus that the community has had on proper governance from day one has been extremely founding fathers style. And then there were a couple of waves of fundraising for the project. The most recent and probably most famous one was Anthony Pompliano wrote a SIP, a Sovereign Improvement Proposal, asking to acquire some Sovryn tokens, and there was a whole bunch of debate in the community, and then the community negotiated with him, and then there was a vote and it passed, and then he was able to participate. So the whole structure has been extremely focused on being decentralized and community governed from day one.
Hey guys, I hope you're enjoying the conversation with Yago thus far. In the second part of this conversation, we go into the details of the Sovryn token and how it plays a role in consensus and governance over the Sovryn ecosystem. I asked Yago what Bitcoiners, or maybe not all Bitcoiners, but the more ardent maximalist flavor of Bitcoins, what they think of the Sovryn token. I'm sure that has turn at least a few Bitcoiners for a tizzy. We also talk about just Taproot and how Taproot is involved with the conversation of Sovryn and DeFi on Bitcoin. And then overall, we just have a more grand, more long-term focused conversation as to like what it means to have DeFi on Bitcoin natively, and also and generally just have a conversation about what it means to be a decentralized base layer and kind of how you need a decentralized base layer to have DeFi at large. Really enjoyed this conversation with Yago. I'm glad I was finally able to get a Bitcoiner on to the Bankless program, because I know Ryan and I put on our Ether hats a little bit, perhaps too often. And so I hope you're enjoying this conversation. But first, we have to take a moment to talk about some of these fantastic sponsors that make this show possible. Balancer is DeFi's most powerful automated market maker. Typical AMMs just have 2 tokens inside of one liquidity pool, which can lead to fractured liquidity across the many pairs of DeFi. With Balancer, you can access the full power of multiple tokens inside of one single AMM, which unlocks an entirely new playing field of possibility. This makes Balancer an awesome building block for so many different use cases. Balancer pools can make asset indexes, but instead of paying fees to portfolio managers, Balancer lets you collect fees from traders who use your portfolio for liquidity. Additionally, Balancer smart pools can be programmed to have properties that change according to predetermined rules, such as changing the swap fee based on market conditions, or even liquidity bootstrapping pools, which can help you launch and distribute your token with day one liquidity. At Bankless, we used a liquidity bootstrapping pool to sell our BAP t-shirts to much success. Balancer V2 brings powerful new features that makes your money work even harder for you. In V2, idle tokens are capable of generating yield in DeFi without sacrificing liquidity in the pool. To top things off, Balancer is reimbursing all gas costs with BAL rewards, meaning that all your gas costs are returned to your wallet with the Balancer governance token. Balancer's mission is to become the primary source of liquidity in DeFi by providing the most flexible and powerful platform for asset management and decentralized exchange. Dive into the Balancer pools at pools.balancer.exchange. Gemini is the world's most trusted cryptocurrency exchange. I've been a customer of Gemini since I first got into crypto in 2017, and it's been my main exchange of choice to make my crypto buys and sells. Gemini is available in all 50 states and in over 50 countries worldwide, and on Gemini there are markets for over 30 various different crypto assets, including many of the hot DeFi tokens, and it's one of the few exchanges that has liquid DAI markets. Gemini just launched their Earn program, where you can earn up to 7.4% interest on 26 various crypto assets. If you're tired of paying fees in DeFi, or you don't want to worry about DeFi exploits, but you still want to earn interest on your crypto assets, Gemini Earn is the product for you. Another product I'm stoked to get my hands on is the Gemini Crypto Back Credit Card, which gives you 3% cash back on all of your purchases, but paid to you in your preferred crypto asset. When I get my Gemini credit card, I'm going to make sure that I get my cash back in ETH. So whenever I buy something, I get a little bit of ETH bonus back to me at the same time. You can open up a free account in under 3 minutes at gemini.com/gobankless. And if you trade more than $100 within the first 30 days after sign up, you'll be gifted a free $15 Bitcoin bonus. Check them out at gemini.com/gobankless. Right. So yeah, so this is the concept of a governance token, which, Bankless listeners are probably extremely familiar with. How does that land with the typical Bitcoiner? Because from what I've gathered, Bitcoiners don't like the G word. They don't like governance. And so has this been like something that you've really had to convince like the average Bitcoiner, or do they kind of, what's been that reception?
Well, it usually starts with, so I'll give you an example. Like recently, now I've been in the Bitcoin space for a long time, and I'm not totally unknown in the Bitcoin space, right? I was recently on a Clubhouse And I started, I wasn't even talking about Sovryn, was not shilling anything. I was just talking about Bitcoiners maybe being a little bit close-minded sometimes. And then somebody started shouting at me, "You've got a shitcoin, you've got a shitcoin." And then I was booted from the room twice and then eventually banned forever. So that has been some of the reception. And I think the initial reaction that almost every single Bitcoiner has had has been deep skepticism initially. And I deeply respect that. So I think that that is the right way to approach almost any project in our space, which is so icky.
Deserved skepticism. Yeah.
But what we've been seeing is that, as they come to understand, one thing which I respect is basically almost everyone's been doing their own research. And as they come to understand how the system works, how it preserves, how it adds to Bitcoin security by paying additional fees to the Bitcoin miners, it does not impact main chain at all, doesn't require people to have larger nodes. And at the same time, provides this entirely new space for Bitcoin to play in. We have started to see basically growing enthusiasm from across the board.
Yeah, right. So this is generally how governance and consensus happens at large, right? And especially with Bitcoin, it starts off no, and then slowly it's like, okay, someone's like, oh, well, maybe, and then other people are like, well, maybe this will work, like maybe yes, question mark yes, and all of a sudden, so it seems like perhaps we're in this like question mark yes, like part of like Bitcoin acceptance of Sovryn. Some people are probably all on board, some people are probably still skeptical, but generally, sort of people are like, maybe this could actually work. So the SOV token, because if it's a governance token, like how it came about and how it got distributed is really, really important. So can you tell us the story of the genesis of the SOV token? Someone minted it, and then it's gotten distributed somehow. Tell us about the minting and distribution process of SOV.
Right. So there was deep philosophical debate about this early on, and the decision was ultimately that the best projects. Okay, so I'll break this up into two parts. The first question was whether or not we are trying to emulate in any way Bitcoin's distribution or some kind of fair distribution mechanism. And both of those were immediately, or not immediately, both of those were summarily rejected.
Declined.
For two reasons.
Yeah.
One, SOV is not a coin. It's not designed to be a coin. The distribution that you would try and do for like a currency doesn't make sense for it. And what it exists higher up in the stack, and it's designed to provide for a rapidly changing, or the ability to have a system which can rapidly change and evolve as an operating system and application layer system. So it was clear that we needed to have some degree of governance. And then the question became, who should govern? Right. And the answer was everyone who uses the system should have the ability to participate in governance. However, if you actually look at the world and you're pragmatic, you can see that the projects that do best are the projects where the original founding team have a deep, long-term stake in the system. And so what was decided to do was to, first of all, provide a pool of 25% of the tokens for the core team, so founders and additional core team who could join, and lock them up for basically forever. So the lockup was for 3 years, making sure basically everyone else gets the opportunity to participate and get tokens in advance. And then, in order to bring in strategic partners and additional financing, a sort of there was a vote. The protocol decided to provide for a series of like rounds. The last one being the Anthony Pompliano round, and there again there were these lockups, so that there would be no situation where you would have this like shitcoin waterfall where people come in early and cheap and then dump on people who come in later. And so the people who are liquid now are basically the people who have gained tokens either by the very, very last like small, like the what we call the origin sale, which was to kick off the system, and who are earning tokens from the system via their participation. And they're basically the ones who are creating the market.
And so if Sovryn is built on Rootstock, which is a sidechain to Bitcoin and gets its consensus from Bitcoin, what does the role of the actual token do? If it's not for a protocol consensus, what does it actually govern over?
So it is protocol consensus. It's just not base layer protocol consensus. So what Sovryn acts as is a financial protocol with all of the base primitives that you would need in a financial operating system. But those need to change over time. They have potentially, different types of risks that need to be adjusted over time. Any system which is like a live application level system exists in a competitive world. It's not money. Money's the whole thing about money is it's supposed to never change. It's like the fact that it's a dead thing, right? Unchanging is an advantage because money is like the centimeter or the meter, right? It's a unit of measure. You don't want it changing all the time, but products or applications need to change and evolve much more rapidly than that. And so the token provides for that. It provides an incentive to do that via the ability to earn the protocol fees that the protocol makes. The protocol, instead of making transaction fees, makes trade or lending fees, in other words, financial fees. And then the third thing it does is for the trustless Bitcoin peg, which is in many ways similar to the TBTC peg, it also acts as a bonded collateral form. Okay, so do you have to stake Sovryn tokens, SOV tokens, to build that peg? And so if there is BTC on Ethereum, is there an equivalent or more amount of SOV tokens bonded? Is that the right way to look at it? Yeah, so currently the peg that we're using is what we call the POW peg, right? Which is this SPV proof peg. There's going to be an additional peg, which is what we believe will be a more trustless and collateralized peg, which has more clear economic assumptions behind it. And then what we expect to ultimately do is be able to merge these, allowing for fractional bonding, so that you would have less SOV bonded than the amount of Bitcoin that you could potentially bring onto the system. But initially, like with the TBTC system, for the economic peg, you would need to have more SOV bonded than Bitcoin coming through. And so we are very lucky that the SOV token has become quite valuable, which potentially allows for quite a lot of Bitcoin to come over. Awesome. And when you would talk about fees paid to SOV token holders, how are those fees determined? Is it similar to like just a gas auction mechanism that you would see on Ethereum with the EVM system? The fees tell us about the fees. The fees are pretty much fixed. So, I mean, they can be adjusted by the governance system, but like when you're introducing a margin trade right now, for example, there's a 0.15% fee. That fee is collected by the protocol. When you borrow, there's a 0.9% origination fee. That fee is collected by the protocol. And then those fees are collectible or effectively distributed to all of the SOV stakers on the basis of their stake weight. In other words, the quadratic weight that we discussed earlier. Right. So on Ethereum, we have like the MKR token, which governs over MakerDAO. We have the Comp token, which governs over Compound. Uni token governs over Uniswap. Is it the SOV token that governs over every single equivalent DeFi application on Sovryn? The SOV token will govern over anything which the Sovryn protocol, or what we call the Bitocracy, right, governs. Now, there are other projects like Babelfish who are building out their own governance system. And some projects prefer to just piggyback off the governance system, which we've already built, which looks like it's quite robust. So again, it's permissionless. And some devs prefer to work within the structure of SOV being the governance sort of asset, and the Bitocracy being the governance system. And so that has become extremely feature rich. And in addition to that, anyone, like for example, one of the things that we don't currently have is any options trading. If you, David, wanted to build an option trading system and have your own governance system for it, you could absolutely do that and integrate with Sovryn. Very cool. Very cool. So this starts to look like a DAO, right? That starts to look like a decentralized or distributed group of interested staked parties who are interested in the growth and success of Sovryn. And so there's some sort of like
responsibility of Sovryn token holders to build out Sovryn as an ecosystem and also encourage its growth and development and usage. And so this starts to seem like a traditional DAO that we would see on Ethereum. Just now it's on Bitcoin. That's pretty cool.
I can't believe you've used the words traditional and DAO in the same sentence.
Well, the space moves so incredibly fast that anything that's 6 months old is automatically traditional.
But yes, I mean, effectively it is a DAO, and I think that's great, right? Like, why would you want to have a system which is designed to be permissionless and borderless governed by a system which relies on the courts of some jurisdiction, right? You want it to be governed by the blockchain itself.
Right. Awesome. So let's talk about the future roadmap of Sovryn. What do you I guess you as a member of the Sovryn DAO can only speak for yourself, but what do you see as like the future of Sovryn, perhaps more concretely in the short term and more abstractly in the long term?
Well, I think I can talk personally, like where I'm coming from. What I would like, my first desire with this is to just use it. And that's why I've been so engaged, right? Like, I'm basically all in on Bitcoin. I want more Bitcoin. The best way for me to do that is to borrow on the basis of my Bitcoin, more Bitcoin. I want to, you know, like, let's say I want to go on vacation. I don't want to sell Bitcoin. So I want to be able to borrow off of my Bitcoin. So it's just like what I and a lot of people like me want to be able to use. The next step is, I think we have a shared mission with basically Ethereum DeFi, which is to kill the sexes, right? And I don't mean men and women, I mean the centralized exchanges, right? Like they are a aberration in the story of how crypto should evolve. And the sooner we can get rid of them, or at least provide a credible alternative to them, better. And then I think the looking further out, I don't have 100% certainty that Bitcoin ever becomes a reserve asset. There's a lot of reasons why it might not. But I think certainly of all of the assets in the world right now, crypto or not crypto, Bitcoin has probably the best chance of all of them of being the reserve asset in 10 or 15 years. I think that world will require a financial operating system as permissionless, censorship resistant, and borderless as the base asset itself. And I believe that right now, Sovryn by far looks like it has the best chance of becoming that financial layer for Bitcoin.
Right. And this is all very much part of the Bankless revolution. The Bankless revolution, of course, is not just DeFi on Ethereum, it's DeFi at large, and what is true DeFi, which I personally don't think exists on anything that's not a decentralized base layer, right? And so like
that's right,
DeFi on Polkadot, DeFi on Cardano, DeFi on EOS, not actually DeFi. And as you alluded to, Bitcoin on Ethereum is not DeFi for Bitcoin. It's something else. Only something native to Bitcoin can offer DeFi for BTC, the asset. And so this makes me very just optimistic about a bankless future coming in all sorts of shapes and sizes wherever it can manifest. I have one last question, and maybe this is just an open and shut case, but how does Taproot integrate or intersect with Sovryn? Is that a relevant conversation?
Yeah, so Sovryn's not reliant on Taproot, but Taproot's awesome for lots of reasons. But also with regards to Sovryn. So first of all, I think it's going to make it much easier for us to continue to construct even more easy to use permissionless peg systems. Second, it allows for better privacy assurances as you're moving into the Sovryn ecosystem. And it might prove to be, and this is something I'm looking into and I don't have a strong opinion on yet, but I think it might also prove to be a very powerful tool in terms of being able to allow zero knowledge proofs to roll directly into Bitcoin state channels. So, you know, I suspect we'll probably get Taproot around November, and Taproot's really, really cool tech. And I think it's going to make Sovryn easier to do and cooler as well.
Awesome. Well, Yago, this has been a fantastic discussion. I really appreciate you giving me some of your time to just elaborate on what DeFi on Bitcoin looks like. And so if any interested community member is just interested in learning more, where can they go to join the Sovryn community or just read more about Sovryn at large?
Sure. So Sovryn.app is a website that I and a few other people have built for it, and is the primary sort of like front end for the protocol. So it's a great place to start. Our wiki is community driven and extremely extensive. I think it's one of the best documented sort of DeFi platforms anywhere. And if you thought I was in any way interesting, you can check me out on Twitter at Edan Yago, and definitely follow Sovryn BTC. So that's Sovryn BTC on Twitter.
Do you have like a Discord or Telegram or some community common place?
We have a number of community places, but by far the most active is on Discord. So it's the Sovryn SOVRYN. I'm a little bit dyslexic, so I think that's right.
We'll get all the links in the show notes for the listeners.
Sovryn server, yeah.
Well, that's good to hear that you guys on Discord, because if there's one thing I do want to change about the Bitcoin universe, it's about killing Telegram and coming over to Discord. It's way better.
Absolutely. There's actually a really cool version of Discord, which is decentralized, which has been built on Bitcoin.
Oh, what?
Yeah. You should check it out. I'll send you the link. It's called, oh damn, I hope I'm remembering this right, Fabric. And one of the Bitcoin core devs has built it out, and it's starting to become a little bit popular with Bitcoiners. And then there's also a chat system which has been built using Lightning Network called Sphinx, which is really taking off these days.
Starting to see a little, not only DeFi on Bitcoin, but Web3 on Bitcoin too.
That's right. Yeah. Look, I mean, it was bound to happen. That you can't repress that level of like, it's a community that was built on a sense of adventure and innovation and wanting to fuck the status quo and change the world. And you can only repress that for so long.
Well, Yago, this has been a fantastic conversation, and I feel a ton of resonance with what you are doing with Sovryn, with the Bankless Revolution. So, as a steward and pioneer of the Bankless Revolution, thank you for your contributions to the space, and also for coming on and telling us all about Sovryn.
Likewise, and if you ever want to talk about sound money and ultrasound money, I'm happy to do that. And in the meantime, I hope all of us stay Sovryn. Thanks very much.
Power, yeah. We definitely do need to get a little bit more of a Bitcoiner take on sound money at large on Bankless. It's definitely a missing niche, and so maybe we'll have you on to talk about that as well.
It would be my pleasure.
Awesome, thanks, Yago. Hey, we hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, head over to Bankless HQ right now to develop your crypto investing skills and learn how to free yourself from banks and gain your financial independence. We recommend joining our daily newsletter, podcast, and community as a Bankless Premium subscriber to get the most out of your Bankless experience. You'll get access to our market analysis, our alpha leaks, and exclusive content, and even the Bankless token for airdrops, raffles, and unlocks. If you're interested in crypto, the Bankless community is where you want to be. Click the link in the description to become a Bankless Premium subscriber today. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for in-depth interviews with industry leaders, Ask Me Anythings, and weekly roll-ups where we summarize the week in crypto and other fantastic content. Thanks everyone for watching and being on the journey as we build out the Bankless Nation.